there seems to be a natural move now to something that we've talked about a little bit already in this. And you've talked about Mission Zero a lot, and we've talked about the release of the Podium Property Insights, which is this new product by Lendlease to enable you to be much more data driven around aspects of sustainability as well. So why don't we now make that a little bit more succinct and organized in terms of how is Lendlease really approaching your ESG strategy in terms of what's the mission, what are the pledges that you're making, and how are you dealing with it generally?
We're now a 1.5 degree aligned company. So what it means is we've really set ambitious targets, industry-wide targets, and we're aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement, which sets global benchmarks for the real estate industry. And the targets are very clear and, very strong. So what we said is we will achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2025. So for scope 1 emissions producing directly from, fuse, we burn, and scope 2 as well, emissions from the power we consume, brick and mortar, right? So we're consuming a lot. I'm using power and data as we speak. Energy. And then achieving absolute zero carbon emissions by 2040. Now that means we want to eliminate all emissions, including scope 3 emissions generated indirectly from activities, which means the materials that we procure, and without the use of offsets, which is a big deal. Without the use of offsets. And those ambitions are not just big targets. Yes, they are big targets, but we also have roadmaps, commitments that we've translated into 5 steps that gives us long-term really step targets. So for example, the first step is, so out of the 5 steps, the first one is we have now as an organization created a decarbonization investment strategy. The steps 2 is we phase out, the target is to phase out diesel and gas in all our operations. Step 3 is use 100% renewable electricity before 2030. Step 4 is collaborate with our supply chain, how we procure, who we work with, what partners we work with, to set up the pathways to achieve absolute zero by 2040. And step 5 is collaborate with our partners, our occupiers, our tenants, the people who live in our homes, our residents, to transition to completely renewable electricity and achieve absolute zero by 2040. So now
that's really a lot. But it is significant, and I'm going to pick up on I think one element there, which is often forgotten. And I'll tell you with a little story. I was in Hamburg, Germany, about 3 weeks ago, and I was moderating the conference, and we had a presentation by a very, very significant German, Austrian, and Swiss retail operator. I mean, really, probably the biggest out there. And they were doing a presentation on their ESG. And I was sitting there next to a gentleman who was about to chair an ESG panel. And I was sitting there going, this is a lot of rubbish, because all they're doing is they're pledging what their targets are. And it gets my goat a little bit at the moment, Helen, if I'm honest, that everyone's making these pledges and they're not really stacking up behind. They're just saying, well, this is what we're going to do. And I think it's a very easy thing to make a pledge. It's very difficult to do it in practice. And I was sort of going a bit, well, okay, this is a bit PRE. And this gentleman next to me said, James, he said, you're right. He said, but these guys are at least making a pledge. He said, but what they're getting wrong in the way that they're going to achieve that pledge is what you've outlined in step 4. He said, nowhere, and bearing in mind this was a massive retail operator, said nowhere have they mentioned their supply chain, which actually is probably going to be as harmful for them as actually their own buildings and operations that they've got. Yeah. And so I thought that was a really interesting angle to actually focus purely on the actual supply chain itself. And so, kudos for you guys for focusing in on that area.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty exciting. And in my role, it's so good to see all the projects across the 4 regions start to achieve that. All of our Australian commercial office funds under management have now been officially certified as carbon neutral, James, and this also means that they've also met their net zero target well ahead of our 2025 goal. And our Australian Industrial Fund will be fully powered by renewables and carbon neutral this year. In partnership with Aware Super in America, our multi-family portfolio in Boston and Chicago has been verified as net zero carbon as well. And new projects in New York and Los Angeles are also on track as well, with the same goal in construction. So in our Australian building business, we are the first carbon neutral construction services provider in Australia, and all of our Australian construction sites have achieved carbon neutral. And then in Milan, our Milan Innovation District, which is our 100-hectare mixed-use redevelopment, in Italy, which is aimed at zero carbon precinct, it's targeting to be powered by only renewable energy sources. So very exciting. I can go on and on. Look, we're not there yet, obviously, but it's making the real change. And I think when it comes to public and private sectors, we have an opportunity to really transform this when it comes to leadership, it comes to transformation, it comes to innovation, and it's about really moving the needle in our the way we design, the way we procure, the supply chain, through to digitalization, through to being smarter when it comes to responding to our customer needs. And that's where you'll see more of the themes that we've been pushing and disrupting ourselves when it comes to autonomous buildings and sustainable buildings of the future. And what does it really represent when it comes to static physical spaces, to be really conscious and self-governing, accountable, anticipatory decision making to adapt to and respond to human needs. And that's what we're looking forward to an autonomous city, leveraging data insights and needs of the urban population, which we're all accountable to ensuring that we are moving towards the future and not destroying the future.
And just to round that off, in terms of to finish this section on ESG, I think what I quite like about everything you said is it absolutely aligns back to the very purpose that you talked about in the very first edit that people will watch here about describing innovation at Lendlease, which is around the purpose, which is to create places that people thrive, because there is a very much a long-term vision and purpose there, which is, well, we have a duty of care to create places that are going to be around for a long time. So it makes sense.
And when you talk about transformation or innovation, we really need in real estate to move towards Industry 4.0. We've been trying to innovate and understand issues faced by our industry, and really you need to really focus on delivering an enabled transformation through digitalization, focus on those mission critical or mission zero sort of objectives, James. So going back to why and core purpose, that's it.
But it's I'm afraid there are not many people who see it that way. There are many people paying lip service to this whole thing. And it needs a very, very strong stance from strong leadership positions in strong global companies that explain that this is what we are doing. The more we have of that, the more likely we are to actually achieve some of those Paris Agreement ambitions that we all have.